that are going to talk to us about PFAS today. And thought it's the perfect opportunity to get their voices out there because we know that PFAS is just another one of those critical issues that we can never know enough about, and we to get this out of our water and to make sure we're in alignment with what community needs are. So, anybody want to start? Uh, can I pick on Tony since I just saw the light, Tony?
You just like to pick on me, Monica. I'm Tony Spaniola, and John, like you, I'm an attorney, but really not a specialist in this particular area. I'm just happen to be impacted and have gotten involved, and I'll talk about that more when I give my presentation. But I'm involved with in helping to start and involved with the Need Our Water Community Action Group in Oscoda. And also with the newly formed Great Lakes PFAS Action Network. Sandy and I are the citizen co-chairs, and Lisa has been instrumental in helping us to get that off the ground. And then also a member of the leadership team of the National PFAS Contamination Coalition. So lots of PFAS stuff. Who wants to go next?
Oh, I'll go next. I think Lisa was pointing at me. I'm Sandy Wynn-Stelt. I don't have nearly the credentials that Tony has there. I am a pacted citizen in Belmont, Michigan, which is over on the west side of the state. I'm also a part of the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network and the PFAS Contamination Coalition, the national coalition. So I'm just really excited to be here and meet everybody and share some ideas.
And I'm Lisa Wozniak, and I'm really very grateful for this opportunity to be here with especially these two amazing co-presenters. I am the executive director of the Michigan League of Conservation Voters. I am not an attorney. Michigan LCV is a family of organizations that has both a 501c3 and a 501c4, and a key part of our work has been and continues to be focused on active support of impacted communities, whether that be communities grappling with lead poisoning or water shutoffs or infrastructure failures or toxic air, or the challenges posed to us by climate change or PFAS contamination. And we have offices in 4 different parts of the state, including Detroit, Grand Rapids, Traverse City, and Ann Arbor. And one of our most important focus areas over the past few years has been tackling the growing PFAS crisis in our beautiful state that has impacted Michiganders in numerous communities, rural, urban, and suburban. And yeah, I'm delighted to be here with Tony and Sandy, and thank you for the invitation. Do you want us to just jump into the presentation?
Would you please? That'd be great.
Okay, I think we're on slide. We're into the presentation, I think. That is a few slides in. So where are we? Oh, can you go to slide 1? All right, maybe the next slide. There you go. Thank you very much, Victoria, for helping with all this. I'm going to start today with this presentation, but it's really Tony and Sandy that you want to hear from. I want to first say that while PFAS doesn't discriminate based on socioeconomic status, race, or geography, it is one more toxic contaminant in the lives of many people who are already disproportionately hit by pollution and poverty. And I'd like you to think as we go through this presentation, and I know that Tony will bringing a couple of these things to the fore. I'd like you to think about the Marathon facility in AK Steel in the Detroit Dearborn area and about their impact on those communities. I'd also like you to think about rural poverty, where in places like Oscoda, where people subsistence fish and hunt and now have been told that to do so is dangerous to their health. This family of toxins is an added burden to communities that are already grappling with a history of intense environmental injustice. And I believe that its ubiquitousness, if that's a word, provides us collectively an opportunity to connect the dots between communities that don't otherwise work together, but can and should all across the state. So I want to also say that I've said already that I'm really proud to be working with Tony and Sandy, but we've also been up to something together along with the National Wildlife Federation and the Ecology Center and a number of other impacted citizens, where we've launched an entity called the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network. And again, Tony and Sandy, I think, will both be mentioning this new entity in their talking points. So I'm here today from the Michigan LCV, but also as part of support for this amazing new network, because it's really about supporting impacted citizens all across the state. So what the heck is PFAS, and why is it here, and why is it a problem? What's been done about it? If you can go to the next slide, please. These are a class of largely and extremely toxic synthetic chemicals. There's about 8,000 plus in this family. They're often called forever chemicals because they don't readily break down. They persist in the environment, they accumulate in the human body over time. And in recent years, and with increasing pace and urgency, scientists have discovered many, many health effects, which I'll mention in a bit here, to the chemicals that are found within this PFAS class. Next slide, please. So, well, I guess we're one ahead here, but just stay on this slide for just a second. I just want to say that they're everywhere. They have impacted some communities more than others, and with more damaging and horrific ways. Places like Oscoda, which Tony will talk about with the Ward Smith Air Force Base. Places like Rockford, Belmont, due to the Wolverine Worldwide manufacturing of waterproof shoes, which Sandy will talk about. And Detroit, due to numerous industries and facilities, again, like the Marathon facility and AK Steel. In terms of the exposure, here's the thing about these chemicals. These PFAS molecules, and this is for anyone who's checking into this presentation that might be a scientist. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but these molecules are composed of a chain of carbon atoms with fluorine atoms bonded along the chain. And this carbon-fluorine bond is one of the strongest found, meaning that these chemicals do not readily degrade in our environment on the scale of human lifetimes. Thus the name forever chemicals. And PFAS chemicals last for so long in the environment that scientists have been unable to accurately estimate the environmental half-life of the vast majority of PFAS. And the most dangerous exposure to these chemicals is through drinking water. So let's go to the next slide, please. So health impacts. What does it mean for human beings? These PFAS chemicals have been linked to several different types of cancer, developmental and reproductive problems, thyroid disease, reduced immune system function, and other health effects. Research into the health effects of PFAS is rapidly expanding, so we're going to know more with time. But many of the health risks to humans have already been established for these compounds that have been and continue to widely be used in the United States. Again, among the various things that have been discovered, testicular cancer, kidney cancer, ulcerative colitis, high cholesterol, pregnancy-induced hypertension, thyroid disruption, hormonal changes, liver malfunction, obesity, immunotoxicity, low birth weight, delayed puberty, decreased fertility, early menopause, reduced testosterone, prostate cancer, bone density decreases. That's a significant list of impacts. Next slide, please. I think so I've covered this, and next slide again, please. So where do we find these chemicals? Pretty much everywhere is the answer. But again, and we're going to hear from Tony and Sandy, in really intense places where they've been used in manufacturing processes and also by the Department of Defense. They're in food packaging. They're in household items, things like, dental floss and paints and makeup. Think about that. Carpets and rugs and clothing, outdoor clothing, that's rain resistant, non-stick cookware, firefighting foam. This is a big deal. We're going to hear about, our airports, our Department of Defense locations. This is a really ubiquitous chemical that's been found in lots of places. Next slide, please. So we have been testing here in the state of Michigan longer than most states. So I'll give a lot of credit to leadership at the state level. We've been testing and finding PFAS. And so we appear to have a lot more PFAS sites than other states in the country. I will tell you that as states around the country begin to test more rapidly and more readily, they will find that they have PFAS in a lot of places too. So from a national perspective, we do look like we have more, but we also have moved as a result as a state to put some of the strongest, not the strongest, but some of the strongest PFAS regulations in the nation in place surrounding drinking water. But this only pertains to just a handful of the overall thousands of chemicals that are included in the PFAS family. Next slide, please. From a national perspective, this map will show you where things stand. You can see from this slide and the next slide that we have an enormous national PFAS problem, that our nation's drinking water is in peril, that the DoD is enormously responsible for part of the problem, and that Michigan has begun to tackle this problem from both a regulatory and legislative standpoint. But again, much more needs to be done. That's why, and you can include the next slide too, Victoria, thank you. That's why it's so important that we have an entity like the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network, a network that will connect impacted citizens and communities all across this state and into other states so we can work on this together. It's so important that we actually tackle this at a state level, but it's immensely important that we tackle it at a federal level. Because if we actually tackle this at a nationwide level, states that are refusing to lead will have to follow suit. And those like Michigan and Massachusetts and others can help lead the way and are leading the way for a national conversation on this. It is imperative that we protect public health and the environment and ensure true justice for all. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to my friend, Tony Spaniola, and then to Sandy. And again, these are the folks you really want to hear from. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That was an excellent presentation. And to Monica and John and Victoria, and I see Theresa's on the line as well. Thank you all for giving us this opportunity to share some of our experiences with you. As I mentioned earlier, I am an attorney based in Southeast Michigan. My family has a home on Van Etten Lake in Oscoda. We're located in the zone of concern for PFAS contamination from the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base. The state first discovered the PFAS contamination in Oscoda more than 11 years ago. So in Oscoda, we are the first reported PFAS site in Michigan. You saw all those dots. We were the very first one. We're also the first U.S. military PFAS site in the world. And there are over 700 of them now everywhere. And so, yeah, so we've been at this longer than just about it, certainly everybody else in Michigan and most other places in the country. And despite the rosy picture that's often painted by state bureaucrats about leading the nation on PFAS, the true history of both the state and the federal response is ugly and marred by serious failures, rooted in some of the same government agencies that brought us the Flint water crisis. In fact, some of the very same people who presided over the Flint water crisis presided over a 5-year, essentially a cover-up of major findings in Oscoda that had significant impact all across Michigan. They sat on them for 5 years. And I guess this shouldn't surprise you, and Lisa has alluded to this. These failures have had the most serious impact on people who live below the poverty line. There's an award-winning film documentary, and Monica mentioned it, I think, before some of you hopped on. It's by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Sarah Ganim, that poignantly captures this history. Sarah won the Pulitzer Prize for breaking the Jerry Sandusky sex abuse scandal at Penn State, and she contacted me about a minor project, water project that she was working on. She came to Oscoda. She was so appalled by what she saw, so moved that she dropped everything and did this film. It's called No Defense. And it's very timely because it's available for free viewing online from tomorrow through August the 18th. And we really need to get you the link for that. I apologize, I didn't come prepared for that, but we need to get you the link to sign on. And if you really want to fully understand environmental justice in Michigan, not just for PFAS, but it focuses on it, the film really is must-see viewing. And there's also going to be a panel discussion on August the 19th after the free screening period. That's sponsored by the University of Michigan. It's online and it will be moderated by my good friend Monica. So you can move to the next slide if you like. Before telling you how I got involved with PFAS, I want to share a little bit of personal background that I think probably I don't think anybody on this call really knows. And it's always nice to talk about new stuff every now and then, because I want you to understand where I'm coming from and why I think that there is a huge environmental justice component and opportunity around PFAS and experiences like ours in Oscoda. My wife and I grew up in the small rural community of, excuse me, Corunna, which is about 20 miles west of Flint. During our formative years in the 1960s and 70s, our community was all white and segregated. In the early 1970s, a small Bible college nearby brought in some students from Africa on a foreign study program. My family's restaurant was one of the only places that would serve them a meal off campus, and they were unable to find any place to even get a haircut until someone got the bright idea to tell the local barber that these folks really weren't Negroes. They were Africans. And sadly, it worked. But it was a very, very, something that had a huge impact on me and my wife growing up in that environment in the 1960s and 70s, which was supposed to be a time when civil rights were at the fore. And we in Michigan, we were supposed to be one of the leaders in the nation. As an immigrant family, coming from an immigrant family myself, and my family had faced violence and cross burnings at the hands of the Ku Klux Klan 40 years before that. My family really understood what they were going through. We knew what it meant to stay in your place and not get out and not cause a problem, because if you did, there would be repercussions for you. As we moved into adulthood, my wife, who was an early childhood educator, became heavily involved in working with impoverished children of color on Detroit's East Side, as well as African-American men transitioning from prison or substance abuse treatment into society, also on Detroit's East Side. When we got our place in Oscoda, our neighbors knew of my wife's interest and began talking to her about serious issues of poverty, hunger, and homelessness in the small community of Oscoda. One evening, they took us to impoverished areas in Oscoda that we had never seen before. And it was an incredibly sobering experience. I remember we came home and we were just down. And my wife looked at me and said, "They have the same problems here that we have in Detroit." A few years later, in 2016, we received a notice from the health department in Oscoda advising us at our home not to drink our water due to the PFAS from the former Portsmouth Air Force Base. And I quickly discovered that the PFAS problem in Oscoda was massive, as the health department proceeded to issue 5 separate public health warnings to our community. In addition to the drinking water advisory, we cannot eat even a single fish from the Osable River that runs through our community. We can't consume any venison from our area. We can't consume any small game. And if you could move to the next slide, I think it's the next one. We can't even touch, there you see, one before that, if you go back one. Yeah, we can't touch that foam. That's basically from my backyard. That foam is highly toxic PFAS foam, and it, as you can see in this picture, it lines the shores and waterways of our communities. And there's something that a lot of people in Michigan don't know, and this all started in Oscoda. There is a statewide advisory. If you see white foam on a waterway anywhere in Michigan, you're advised not to touch it because it is likely highly contaminated PFAS foam. It is literally everywhere. I have never been to a water body after a rain or windstorm where I haven't seen it. either in Michigan. I just spent a month in Massachusetts, all throughout Boston. It was everywhere on the beaches and in Cape Cod, but that's not very highly publicized. So as I mentioned earlier, the problems that we have in Oscoda have a disproportionately large impact on the substantial portion of our community that lives below the poverty line. One of the problems we face is drinking water, and Monica and I have discussed this many, many times. Our local unit of government is attempting to extend water lines into areas where there's contamination, to take away the people's reliance on private wells. And in the course of doing that, they have found that people are not hooking up. And the reason they're not hooking up is twofold. One, it costs anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 to hook up. That's not, people don't have pocket change that they can afford to do that with. The other problem is that all of a sudden, people who've never had a water bill in their lives and who are living just hand to mouth every day can't afford to pay the water bills. So much like the affordability problem that is faced throughout the urban areas in our state, we have that problem in Oscoda. And sadly, the people who are attempting to address the PFAS problem simply say, well, we've extended the water line, no big deal, no problem, everything's fine. Well, no, that's not the case at all. Because in addition to the water problem that we have that disproportionately impacts the poor in my area, we also have, as Lisa mentioned, we have an advisory not to eat any fish or wild game. Well, in my area, people live off fish. They live off the wild game. They can't afford to go to the grocery store and just substitute something for the fish that they can't eat. So they walk right past the signs that say, don't eat the fish, and they fish and they eat them. And our somewhat disconnected state regulators say, well, these people are stupid. They don't read the signs, they just go and fish anyway. So what's the use of even trying? And the response to that is, no, you don't get it. They're not like, they can't just go to the grocery store and substitute something else in. We also, in my community, on this lake, you can see the picture here, off to the, so it'll be the left-hand side of the picture, is a YMCA camp. It's owned by the YMCA of Metropolitan Detroit. And it is a place where kids from the inner city of Detroit, poor kids from Detroit and Flint, come to be in the outdoors. There is a PFAS plume that flows right under that YMCA camp and comes out and vents. You see where you see the foam here, foam like that accumulates on the shoreline where those kids play, where they swim, where they kayak. And what is being done about it? Nothing. It's as if it doesn't exist. In 2019, the state of Michigan developed a memorandum that talked about a serious problem in one of the marshes where many poor and homeless people fish and eat. And what they found is that it's the most contaminated area in the entire Great Lakes region. And in this memorandum, they essentially said, hey, you shouldn't eat any of the small game, frogs or muskrats or anything in this area because it's harmful to your health. We asked the state health department to issue a notice in the local newspaper of Oscoda, letting the community know about this problem. They refused. They refused not once, but twice, but 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and several of us went all the way up the chain within the department. They still refused. So we went to the Detroit Free Press. And the story that the state didn't think was worth printing in the little old Oscoda Press made the front page of the Detroit Free Press. And it didn't just make the front page, it was the headline on the front page. And again, the state agencies and the federal agencies tend to sweep these things under the rug. And we have people who know their place. I talked about that earlier, who know their place and don't want to speak up and bring attention to their problem, who are being overly impacted by these issues that continue to be swept under the rug. If you could go to the next slide. This is a slide from Schaefer Highway in the downriver Detroit area. This foam crossed Schaefer Highway and closed the highway for 2 days. It was either 2018 or 2019. And at the time, we in Oscoda were dealing with the foam problem. We were the first place that discovered it. And somebody called me and said, look at this foam. What do you think? And I said, I tell you what I think. It's not good. The state sprayed the foam down into the sewer and into the Detroit River, took some samples and discovered PFAS in that foam at 892,000 parts per trillion, which is the highest foam reading I've ever heard anywhere. And we have it really high in Oscoda. And what did they do? They didn't tell anybody. They kept it secret. And then a reporter by the name of Paula Gardner from the MLive newspapers at the time did a FOIA request, found out that we had those levels in the foam in the Detroit area, but it was too late. It had already been washed into the Detroit River. You can go to the next slide. I think it's another picture of the same foam that you can see from there. Most recently, there was a report again by the MLive newspapers. They've done outstanding reporting on PFAS. And the headline was, "It's raining PFAS across the Great Lakes." They found high levels of from Indiana, a research facility in Indiana, tested rainwater at various points in the Great Lakes region. And they found exceptionally high levels at places like the Sleeping Bear Sand Dunes, where there is no source of PFAS contamination in the area. And another area, I believe, in the Upper Peninsula. But they also found, they tested in Chicago, and they tested in Cleveland. And the levels in those two cities was astronomically high. They didn't test in Detroit. I'm not sure why, but the implication is very, very clear to me that in the air in our urban areas, this PFAS that's coming down in the rain is coming from somewhere. And when you look at the fact the higher concentrations are in the urban centers like Chicago and Cleveland, Detroit has to be a hotspot. It needs, first of all, we need to test it. We need to check it out. And unfortunately, this type of testing doesn't get done unless there's an impetus from the outside to make it happen. So we also, it's very important to know that where PFAS was very first discovered in all of the country down in Charleston, West Virginia, huge water contamination of that entire community's water supply. The biggest contamination of the water supply occurred up gradient from the contaminant source. And it occurred because of air emissions that were deposited into the water as they were carried by the wind. So again, in the Detroit area, I'm really concerned. I mean, I live in Metro Detroit. I'm really concerned about the fact that we have that issue that needs to be explored, and that we have issues, the same types of issues again that we have in Oscoda, eating fish from the Detroit River, from the Rouge River, from other areas in the metropolitan area, high sources of PFAS contaminant levels. And what we see is that the state of Michigan has essentially said, hey, look, the Detroit water system is fine. They've really only tested it for a few PFASs. I'm not confident in that finding. But so we're going to move and we're going to focus our efforts elsewhere. No, that shouldn't be the case. We need to look at Detroit, and we need to look hard to find the problems that are there, just like in Oscoda. And what I want to tell you about Oscoda is that in 2012, a man by the name of Bob Delaney, who worked for the Department of Environmental Quality, now known as EGLE at the time, he was the person who first found PFAS in Michigan. He authored in August of 2012 a 93-page report. Essentially, it was entitled Michigan's Contaminant-Induced Health Crisis. And there is a link to that now online that we should get you, because if you want to know about PFAS, you should read about it. And what he said was, based on what we found in Oscoda, there is a health crisis looming in Michigan all across the state, in waterways and in wildlife, virtually everywhere. The director of the Department of Environmental Quality, who was the same person who presided over the Flint water crisis, sat on that report and didn't do anything about it. In that report, one of the findings is that in Oscoda, Delaney surmised that people who had been eating the fish, people that and the wild game in that area, likely have high levels of PFAS contamination in their bloodstreams, dangerous levels. Those were his words. That was 9 years ago. Our state and our federal government, the federal government is the polluter here, have done nothing to help those people, to even find out where they are. It's as if they don't exist. And I bring this all back to when I speak to my wife about her work in Detroit, when I speak to my friend Monica, when I speak to other people in urban areas like Flint, in the area where I grew up, it's much the same. It's as if these people don't count. It's as if they don't exist. And it's the same set of government actors in different contexts, but in very similar, who are bringing these same problems to everywhere in Michigan. And it's really critically important that we not allow our geographic differences or our racial differences, economic differences to stand in the way of an issue that can unite us all across this state. There is an incredible opportunity here to bring together diverse communities behind an important issue. PFAS, yes, but all the other issues. If you can't drink your water, you can't drink your water, no matter what it has in it. So I say to you all, please look at this as part of the broader scope of environmental justice issues in our state. And I'm going to close and turn it over to Sandy by saying one last thing, because Monica asked us to point out issues where you might be able to help us. The state of Michigan is currently considering an initiative that was initiated by folks in Traverse City who live in an area that was contaminated by PFAS. And it was brought forward through this Michigan Citizens Advisory Work Group set up by Governor Whitmer. In that area, they found potential PFAS contamination, and they began an investigation, but never notified the impacted citizens that the investigation was ongoing. They waited 8 months until they found that there was actually PFAS contamination in their drinking water, and then told the people after the fact. We are recommending that the state adopt a policy to notify people at the beginning of an investigation so that they can take proactive measures to take care of themselves ahead of time, and to involve those people in the investigation so that it will have a meaningful impact for everyone from the very beginning. So you could certainly help us in that regard. I want to now take a break and turn it over to my much more happy friend, Sandy Wynn-Stelt from Grand Rapids.
Thank you, Tony. Am I getting an echo here? Okay, there we go. So thank you, Tony. I hate going after Tony because he has all this knowledge and understands all this, and I don't really come with that level of expertise. So what I want to do is just tell you my story, because I think my story is really like everybody else's story that's impacted by this. And I think sometimes that's what it takes to make people pay attention. Not that you're not paying attention. If you could go to the next slide. So my story is, this is my husband, Joel. My husband, Joel, and I met in 1985. Joel was a social worker, and I worked with people with disabilities. And I chased him around and flirted, and he completely ignored me for a year or two. But eventually, he paid attention. Joel was from Pontiac, and I was from Parchment, but we were both working in the Grand Rapids area. We got married in 1991. And in 1992, even though we were broke as a joke, we decided we wanted to buy a house. And so we found a place in Belmont, Michigan. If you want to go to the next slide, I think. Belmont is a little town north of Grand Rapids. It's kind of to the west, I guess, of Rockford. So it's kind of a working class rural area. It was really quiet and we loved it. What we loved the most about it was we were surrounded by this Christmas tree farm that was across the street. And even though we both worked in human services, we didn't really like people that much. So Christmas trees made great neighbors as far as we were concerned. And we lived really boring, dull, run-of-the-mill lives. There was nothing that exciting going on. We liked to camp, and we liked to go to bookstores, and we hated each other's music, and we were just best friends. There's no other way to put it. In 2016, we were getting ready to celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary. Joel was having some stomach issues, and he went in for what we thought was a hernia repair, but he was instead diagnosed with stage 4 liver cancer, and he died 3 weeks later. And my world kind of crumbled at that point. Grief is hard for everyone, so I'm not going to act like my grief was any harder. But I think when you lose a partner that you've planned to spend the rest of your life with, there's kind of an emptiness there that's really hard to fill. But you time goes by and you move on. And it was the following summer that the Department of Environmental Quality came to my home and asked if they could test my water for PFAS. Like most people, I had no idea what PFAS was. I didn't even know I had a well. But I remember walking out with them and saying, sure, you can test my water. I'm glad you're taking some interest in this, because after Flint, you can't let Flint go on again. And they said they agreed, though I'm not sure they really took that to heart. It was 3 weeks later that this whole team of people came to my house. Now, given that I worked in government and Joel worked in government, I knew when a team of people show up at your house, it's not for good news. They told me that my water tested at that time at 23,000 parts per trillion. And again, what I would say to you is when government agencies show up and start throwing out these statistics, it means nothing to you. They then explained to me that that was higher than the 70 parts that the EPA had set as the health advisory. But I knew I was in trouble when they started bringing in the infamous things of water, when they started bringing in containers of bottled water, and they told me that I could no longer drinking my water. I knew I was in trouble. They explained to me then that my water was testing higher than Oscoda. And that, again, was the first time I had heard of Oscoda, but I kind of pieced it together after that. I asked if it was dangerous, and they went through the list that Lisa shared with you of potential hazards, though they kind of downplayed it. And it wasn't until I heard that it was related to cancer and liver disease that I said to them, you know, my husband just died a year ago of liver cancer. And that's when everybody went quiet. And as the kids say, that's when stuff got real, because I think people realized we had a problem. My well was tested several times after that. I think they thought it was it was a false positive. It's tested as high as 80,000 parts per trillion of my drinking water. And keep in mind, we lived there for 25 years. I asked where this was from, and they told me they didn't know. And I know now that that was just kind of a bold-faced lie. In fact, one of the people that was at my house that day was a environmental consultant for Wolverine Worldwide. And he acted like he had no clue what was going on. It was later that I learned that the Christmas tree farm that was really the drawing point for us was a permitted landfill. So the township knew, the city knew that this was there, where Wolverine had dug trenches and buried Scotchgard and tannery waste on 60 acres of land. And when it filled those trenches, they poked through the clay barrier that was there naturally. So it seeped into the aquifer, and it has contaminated 25 square miles of drinking water. This is an area that's kind of a working class community. And so people, much like Tony talked about, are kind of resistant to hooking up to municipal water and paying for a water bill. We were not anticipating that. Not only did we have PFAS in there, but we had all sorts of other environmental contaminants. If you want to go to the next slide. This is a map of the area, and the dots that are red at the time were ones that were well above the criteria. These are all homes that have private wells and are now getting municipal water. The yellow dots are ones that where PFAS was detected, and the red dots are danger Will Robinson levels. So you can see this has contaminated a huge area. What I want to point out is there to the very right, you'll see the Rockford Tannery area. The area around it doesn't have any dots because shortly after Wolverine found this out, they helped provide municipal water to that area. It's the other areas to the west of it that really are not in Rockford that were contaminated. And those major parts where you see the blue arrows coming through are areas that Wolverine would literally bring truckloads of tannery waste and dump into those fields, sometimes giving it to farmers as biosolids, selling it to people because they thought it would be good for your land, and it's contaminated this whole area. I was actually pretty lucky in that Oscoda had happened. And so when Belmont happened, it kind of got people's attention. I was in the midst of a, I guess, lucky storm between Oscoda and Flint. The governor didn't need another water contamination issue. I was also lucky that I was able to find a private law firm that would take our case. And I can't express enough that there's a lot of communities that don't have access to that. Either they don't have law firms that are big enough and have the depth that they can take it, or they don't have law firms that have a conflict of interest. So I was lucky that we had a law firm. My law firm got on this, got us water to drink, but also got my blood tested. And so in 2018, I think you can go to the next slide, my blood was found to be at 750 times the normal level. This is a lot of information here, but this is from a place called the PFAS Exchange. It's been really helpful in helping us determine this. If you look down here, you'll see on both of these are just two of the many types of PFAS chemicals. Keep in mind there's 4,000 of these chemicals and only probably 12 to 15 are really tested. I think only 6 are regulated in the state of Michigan. But if you look at my blood results, they're in the yellow or in the orange there at the top. These are multiples of what other areas are. So Decatur, Alabama has a huge issue from military bases, and I also think 3M has a plant there, as does Pease Tradeport in New Hampshire. And mine, as Alan Ducketman, one of the doctors in Parkersburg, West Virginia, explained, if you held my test results on your desk on a piece of paper, my line would be above your ceiling as to where I am compared to the rest of the country. So while it's nice to be in first place, this wasn't one of the things that I wanted to do. We were lucky that Wolverine had a lot of bad publicity, I guess, a lot of media coverage. I was lucky that we had MLive reporters here who were dogged in this. And so because of that, eventually, after 3 years, Wolverine did settle with the state and the township in providing municipal water to most of the people in our area, though I need to say not all. And we have a number of people that are renting in mobile home parks that are very limited in their resources, that are not getting access to municipal water and have no way to get this because we have so many environmental contaminants in this area. This has pretty much devastated my community. And I can't stress enough that this chemical not only bioaccumulates, but you can't get rid of it. It won't burn, it won't dissolve, it won't go anywhere. You can't taste it, you can't see it, you can't smell it. So I really do worry that we have people in urban areas that are drinking this and watering gardens with it and playing in it and breathing it that have no idea it's there. We don't understand all the negative effects of this. So there's some things that I really think we need. And when you talk about asks, we need people with private wells to have their wells tested for this, not just people in municipal water systems. I know in talking with Abby Hendershot at Eagle, she's very concerned that there's people in the Detroit area that have stab wells, which I'd never heard of, which I guess are wells so that they can have water to drink if they can't afford the water. And those very much could be contaminated. We have no way to get people water, to provide sustainable water for people that they can either afford or that they can maintain, whether it's a whole home filter system or hook up to municipal water. Water in our state should not be a privilege, and it should not be something that only people with wealth can get. This should be something that every citizen in our community has access to. And we don't know how much of this is in people's blood. This is not covered by insurance. Polluters are not being required to pay for blood testing or blood monitoring. And I think that's something that definitely needs to occur. My blood work was $1,000 to get to find this out. And I was very lucky. I was able to take this blood work to my doctor, who kind of looked at me and went, "What do we do now?" But the moral of this story is last year I started having some really odd symptoms. And his words to me were, your thyroid would be about 20th on the list of concerns, but because of your PFAS levels in your blood, I want an ultrasound. And at that point, I was found to have thyroid cancer that had metastasized to lymph nodes. The only reason I found this was because I had the blood work. The only reason I found this was because my well had been tested and I knew that I had this. So again, I think we really need to have this. This needs to be throughout the state. This isn't just a West Michigan area or a Nescoda issue. We need this kind of care and treatment for our water and for our citizens everywhere. So I have more to go through, but we have 8 minutes to go. So I'm going to cut it short so we can answer any questions. So thank you for letting me talk.
First, I want to say thank you so much to all three of you. Sandy and Tony, thank you so much for sharing so deeply and so personally your stories. I think it was an incredible addition to this whole story as overall. And I want to allow others to ask questions, but I just want to share that gratitude.
Definitely, and I just want to ditto what Victoria said. Just it's always good to get that high level understanding of how this work has moved, but also just to hear Sandy. I think this is maybe the third time I've heard that amazing love story between you and your husband, but then it always just brings me to tears to realize, how devastating this process has been, not only for you personally, but for you and Tony and the community. And so just like we asked and Tony shared, are there any things that you and Lisa would want us to take away through the MAC-EJ Water Committee in terms of policy recommendations or shifts, or at least making sure people are hearing you? And then I definitely want John. I think your hand is up and Theresa's hand is up as well. But Sandy, do you maybe listen, if you and Lisa want to respond to that, and then we'll take the other questions?
Yeah,
Sandy,
I
do
guess,
you want to go first?
Sure. I
Yeah.
guess for me, the three big takeaways are, we need to know where this is, not just in municipal water. I worry that we have a lot of people that are on private wells that don't know that they're being contaminated. I worry that we have air quality issues, river issues. We need to know the scope of this more than we do. People need to have access to water. I don't need to tell you that, Monica. People have to have access to clean, drinkable, sustainable water that they can have. And then people need to know if this is in their blood so they can work with their primary physician to determine what the course of treatment is going to be. So those would be my three big policy things that I would like to see. Those are the first three things in the top of my head.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Lisa?
I would just add, Sandy is of course spot on. I would just add that making sure that this is one of the key issues that the MAC-EJ is raising to the top, because not only is this administration aware of this, the intersection between environmental justice and this contamination is huge. And I think it offers, your leadership offers a louder voice both in Lansing, but I would also say to our congressional delegation and into our the president, the administration, this administration, the Biden-Harris administration has made environmental justice a very important part of their work, and I'm not sure they're focusing on PFAS as part of that, the issues that they need to tackle within that space. So anything and everything you can do to elevate this within those confines, we would be incredibly appreciative. Should we go to John? Yeah.
I think Theresa's hand was up first, actually, so she can go.
Go ahead, Ms. Theresa.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Greetings. Good to see you all again. You know, we are always in these meetings and platforms to expose what is happening on a widespread level. I want to tell you, Sandy, thank you for hearing your story again. And Tony, thank you for addressing the widespread issue of PFAS, PFOS. We know it's not just surface water. We know it's just not well water. We know that the companies that actually utilized these chemicals actually contaminated water sources in urban areas. And so as a member of the MPART, as which Tony is as well, what can we do to move the needle forward in advocating to the EPA? Mr. Regan came a few weeks ago, and Monica and Sylvia O'Donoghue, they have been just dynamic in responding with the letter. But we know that everybody is impacted. And as Tony had mentioned in his presentation, they tell you don't fish, but they don't, and the signs say don't eat the fish. And we need something that says that we need our water tested on a continual basis. So what can we do to move that forward? Because as Tony mentioned, the PFAS that came from several companies, Marathon, GLE Scrapyard, and I think Norfolk, Virginia Railroad, and it was washed into the drains and which went into our water system, and as Sandy mentioned, can't be removed. They're not really telling us the truth, in my opinion. What can we do to increase the amount of PFAS that can be put on the list to be watched for? Because it's like Sandy mentions, over 4,000. Really, it's over 5,000. And you only have 7 that are being monitored, but all are dangerous. So what can we do as the MPART to move this forward, that they increase that list and to put preventive measures or information, educational information out there for people that are being exposed to PFAS unknowingly? Thank you.
I think first of all, and Tony, I think you agree with this. We want this as a class. I don't want each individual PFAS. I want the whole class of them to be listed together so that we don't have to run through all 4,000 and decide what's dangerous. So I agree with you, Theresa. We have to start looking at this as the bigger picture of this.
Yeah, and I agree with Sandy completely. And I think that, Theresa, you said a lot, and I agree with you. I think that from a policy perspective, the best thing that we could do is to move the needle so that we are not producing, we're not allowing the production of any more PFAS contaminants into our system. I mean, when I started into this, there were, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 of them. That was just a few years ago. Now there's 8, 9. I mean, the number just grows all the time. And in doing this on a one-off basis is going to take literally thousands and thousands of years for us to even begin to address them all. It just makes no sense. It makes no sense to be putting chemicals into our environment that we know are going to be there forever and ever. It's just a backwards approach, and then waiting for people, whether it's sadly Sandy's husband, my neighbors in Oscoda, to become ill and to pass away and to lose family members. That's just a backwards, wrong way to do it. So that would be one thing. And Theresa, I firmly believe that within the MPART group, we need to start to press the focus to shift to the Detroit and other urban areas. I think that, and that issue has come up a little bit in some of the meetings, but I think we need to move that to the front of the line, because what I've found, at least in my dealings with the state and with the bureaucrats, is that when they're faced with demands from people who aren't going to back down, they may take a while and it's incredibly frustrating, but they don't like trouble. So if trouble's brewing, they one way or another, they find a way to deal with it. And I think just as we did with that Traverse City issue, that we made that a hot issue to be dealt with, that we wouldn't let go away. I think that's got to start happening not just in the Detroit area, but focusing on Detroit and other urban areas around the state. We know we have it in Flint. We know it's in the Flint River. Instead of just going, oh, well, the drinking water's fine, we need to go, well, wait a minute. It's in the air. We found it in the Great Lakes and Lake Erie and Lake Ontario at such high levels that it's got to be coming from someplace. And where's it coming from? The industrial areas. We know that. And so we've got to start looking. So those are just some thoughts, Theresa, and I really look forward to working with you in that MPART group. And I know Sandy shaking her head as well to move the needle and move the focus on the Eagle side of things. And I think on the bigger policy issue, we need to be talking to the governor, or we need to be talking to people in the legislature saying, do what they did in Maine, issue a ban, a phase out. And Sandy, I love your cat. Anyways, I could talk forever, and John has his hands up. So hopefully that answered at least some of your question.
Yeah, just real quickly. So how feasible is treatment of the water, and how feasible is cleanup? Because I'm thinking like for specifically like industrial sources, if the state of Michigan were to designate, water quality standards for impairment of waters based on PFAS presence, they could require industrial point sources to either limit the amount that they're emitting into the environment or like take corrective action to clean up water before it's emitted. But I just like don't know the technical feasibility of either treatment or cleanup. And cleanup too, like the state, I mean, if cleanup is feasible, do something under like CERCLA, the Superfund law. But I guess how feasible are those two things, cleanup and treatment?
So it's an interesting question you asked, John. It's a very good one, because again, in the course of discussion that I've had on this over the years, one of the first things I hear from people who are looking for excuses not to take action is, oh, it's hard to clean up. The fact of the matter is that particularly the longer chain PFAS, the PFOA, the PFOS, which are the two we're studying the most, they can be cleaned up. It's costly and it takes time, but there are treatment systems like a granular activated carbon and ion resin exchange that I know are being used in Oscoda. We're not cleaning up enough of the problem, but they do work. And the challenge and we do have standards in Michigan. We have wastewater treatment plant standards, and they're actually doing some work. I give the state credit. They're actually doing work to try to work back from the wastewater treatment plants to the users to try to knock down, some of the numbers that are being emitted. So we do have we do have groundwater standards. We do have, point source standards for PFOA and PFOS. The problem is at the federal level, we have nothing. So when you talk about the EPA and you talk about CERCLA, there are some things under CERCLA that can be done under the pollutant and contaminant portion of it, but the polluters and the Department of Defense love to say, well, we don't have any regulations. It's not a hazardous substance under federal law, so our hands are tied.
Just
So
a quick question. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lisa.
no, I was just going to say, Monica, I know that we're coming to the close to the end, and I just wanted to say that one of the reasons that I, among many, that I enjoy and think is so important to work with Tony and Sandy is that the voices of impacted community members, as you've heard today, are the most powerful voices that are out there. And so one of the things I think also that's really important for all of us to think about is this network that Tony and Sandy have just helped to launch, and building up the other voices that we may know in other communities around the state and around the region who want to join in with this new network. Because the louder and the bigger the group of people are that come together across all sorts of lines, whether they be geography, or municipal boundaries, et cetera, the more powerful and more, the push is going to be to really make the kind of change we're talking about here today.
Thank you so much for that, Lisa. And that definitely is in the same vein that we want this table to operate as a platform and a place for communities' voices to be elevated. And I know that everyone here, John and Theresa, as part of the MAC EJ, and of course, Victoria, as part of our own organization, We the People of Detroit, we are deeply committed to making this table be that advisory to any governor and any legislative body in Michigan about these issues. And so PFAS definitely is a high priority on that list. And so along with the things that you've shared, if there are anything that, along with, I put in the chat, the flyer, the ways to link on to the film No Defense, to be able to support that activity. And also, I think there's information on how folks can donate and elevate that activity. We also would like to hear from you if there are other things that we should be doing or we should add when we share this information with the larger body in terms of ask, appeals, policy shifts, and recommendations, because we want to be able to do that as well. Is there anything else from the Mackie J side of the table, or anything else from our panelists and guests?
I think we've covered most of it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so
Well,
much
Lisa,
for
thank you for
presenting.
always answering the call. And Tony, the Tiger, and Sandy, just for being the great champions that you are for water and for PFAS and for Michigan. You definitely have been just the canary in the mine, and we really appreciate you.
Thanks for the opportunity to be here today with you.
Thank you for allowing us to record.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks,
Right.
Monica.
Thanks so much,
John.
Mackie J.